welcome to the Property Show. I'm Jayashree Kurup. I'm editor MBTV, and today this is part of our series on how to buy a plot across India. We're doing this over a month, and this is the second in our series. So, first of all, how do you choose the right plot? What are the factors that can make your money grow? And discussing this with us is Rashmi Deshpande. She's an advocate with the High Court of Karnataka. And there's Sunil Agarwal, who's a founder and partner, Black Olive Ventures Private Limited. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. Rashmi,
Thank you, Jayashree.
let's go into the legal due diligence. Is buying a plot more difficult than buying an apartment? And how do you go about making sure that the land titles are clear?
Yeah. So, to start with, I think owning a piece of land has always been considered a very prestigious thing, historically. And people do attach a lot of significance to buying a plot versus buying an apartment, because there is a sense of permanence, that it cannot be taken away. While in an apartment also you do get something called as an undivided share in the land, but that is more of a notional ownership. Whereas while you buy a plot or a piece of land, you have real ownership over the immobile property, and that attaches a lot more emotional significance to it than owning an apartment. And people also have the flexibility of constructing their, what you call as a dream house. And given the current situation with the pandemic and work from home being a more realistic option that various employers are looking at in the long term. So location work has become now location agnostic. So people are actively considering moving to the outskirts where they can actually get a property of their liking. And we are seeing in the last few months that there is a significant increase in demand for plots even further away from cities. So this can have multiple impact, like it can give rise to satellite townships, which we have already seen. Various cities have given rise to these satellite townships in the periphery, which have now merged into the larger city jurisdiction. But we are now seeing that the movement is further away, and it is giving rise to a more sustainable living cluster. Like we are seeing that there are developers who are willing to offer large scale development, which will not only have plotted development, but various other amenities that you would look at in a community living, like a large clubhouse, swimming pool, medical facilities, even schools, so that it becomes a cluster in itself where people can live within the confines of that community and enjoy the comfort that they're looking for. But like in any property transaction, you need to be extremely careful about the due diligence. Now, when we talk about plotted development, there could be two things that we are looking at. A standalone plot in a city, where you just look at if it is a plotted development which is undertaken by the development authority. Now, each state has its own, law with respect to development authority, which will, and various development authorities are also in the business of forming plots and selling. So in which case you rely on the due diligence, which is limited to the time that the development authority acquires the land and forms the layout. So it is a statutory process. And so long as you are able to confirm that the required provisions under the statute have been complied with, and the authority has followed all the norms for formation of the layout and allotment of individual sites, your title is clear. The second type is where it is a private development, where a private developer acquires land from various individuals and then forms a layout and sells it. So here the complexities are slightly more, because what we see typically is that the ownership of land is not consolidated under one individual or entity, but it is more of the aggregator model which is at play. So you will have, if you're looking at a 60-acre plotted development, you could have, say, 45 different parcels of land which form the underlying land for that 60-acre development. So when you do a due diligence, first you will have to identify in which parcel of this larger development the particular plot is situated. So that will be the crux of the due diligence. But then again, you will also have to go few steps ahead and see the title for the larger parcel of land as well, because normal assumption is that people believe if my plot of land, if I'm looking at a 60-40 plot of land, if this 2400 square feet of land has clear title, I'm sorted. But that is not how it works. You will have to see the title to the larger extent of land, ensure that in the process of aggregating this land and obtaining the approvals, the layout plan, etc., the developer has followed all the process and has the approvals for forming the plots, selling it, and providing the infrastructure in the layout. That is also very crucial. So you'll have to make sure that the developer has got access to this community from the main road, and he has formed the internal layouts, roads. Given up, there is also a requirement of relinquishing a certain parcel of land to the concerned, municipality or the development authority for taking approval for a layout. So whether all of this has been complied with or not. So this entire due diligence exercise needs to be undertaken before you can proceed to buy the plot.
Sunil, I'll come to you. When we see that there is an enhanced demand for plots, can plots be financed, and are developers launching plotted projects now?
So I think today, when you look at buying of plots, they can be financed. There was a time when a lot of lenders were not financing plots, but today, given the fact that most of these residential plots, industrial plots, even commercial to some extent can be financed. So good news is that yes, you can finance these plots.
Yeah.
The other part of the question I slightly sort of missed.
Are developers now launching more plotted projects? See, in the beginning, we had plotted projects. After that, we saw that everybody was doing built-up properties. And now we are seeing some more developers coming out with plotted projects. So what has changed?
Okay, so I think a lot has changed in the real estate market. See, developers would ultimately qualify as people who are adding value to land. So ultimately, when you look at a developer, he would be very happy selling land and making a money on it. I think construction is not what most of the typical developers were used to doing or would want to do.
Yeah.
Because, getting the permissions, building it, handling the labor, all the complexities, I think best avoidable. So I was, remembering one, a developer. He's a local developer from NCR. Both of us know. He's a guy called Rashmi, and he was making a mall. And typically, what somebody said is malls are never sold, so you will have to lease them and then obviously go into a REIT format. And he said, ठीक है, आपकी बात सुन लेते हैं. नहीं तो क्या होगा? दुकाना काट के बेच देंगे मॉल को. So ultimately, it is always this barfi, which is the most attractive of all developments for a developer. So typically, when developers did not have the capability, they used to do plotting developments. Look at DLF. I mean, DLF started with Krishna Nagar, which was a plotted scheme. Then he went to Model Town 1, 2, 3 was a plotted scheme. Then he went to South Extension 1, 2, GK 1, 2. So anything that you look into large developers were typically plotted developers. Then obviously, as people had lesser time to build their homes, there came a time when developers started to develop and give ready home buyers. Then you had this, big boom in the Indian land market where everybody wanted to grab land. And you had a lot of people who were not developed also or were not typical developers. They were land aggregators. एक अच्छा सा gate बनाया और अंदर colony काट दी. Now this is something that, sold like hotcakes because everybody thought that the grandchild is never going to have a place to stay because prices are rising so fast. And so you saw huge ghost towns developed in Indore, in Pune, even in Bangalore. Around every city you had these large plotted colonies with almost very little roads, one large, good-looking, fancy gate, and nobody actually went to live there. So the idea was that, you make money by selling plots, and that was what most of people do. When that frenzy stopped, I think some of the transactions started to happen where people started to make maybe a group housing, maybe a certain amount of villas so that the colony has some life. And then, developers started to because if they wanted to sell more, they had to, make a clubhouse, as Rashmi said, and so forth. So I think current stage is that people are so busy doing what they have in their hand that most of the developers are trying to finish projects for the reasons of RERA, or the laws have become strict, and most of the focus is to sort of complete the construction in hand. However, if there is a new developer who's kind of come in the market, still has a certain amount of land, and he finds that it is impossible to do a 100-acre township. Also, I think a lot of developers have realized that over a period of time, slim is beautiful. I mean, the fact is that if it is 10-15 acre project, it's manageable. The moment you expand it to a 100-acre, 50-acre, 200-acre projects, it is not possible physically to do that project, and also it drains you out because the lifespans of such project is about 10 years, 15 years. So when such realization has come, you have seen some schemes which which have come in NCR or which have come in other cities, where developers are saying, "मेरे पास land bank बहुत है. I know now for certain that this land bank is only going to sit as a financial liability on my balance sheet. It is easier to sell plots if I do some good stuff. So let's get off this liability, sell them as plots, get the money in, complete your project, and try and have optimal land bank rather than a huge land bank on your balance sheet, because land bank on your balance sheet suddenly has lost its charm." So I think it's a cycle, and obviously cycles happen for a reason. But I think at this point in time, you're seeing this resurgence of plots, because obviously there's still a charm about plots. People do want to buy plots, no matter how much the world moves into this community living in apartments in mega cities. And I know distinctly people who are very they want to go into a apartment rather than a Indian standalone house. But when you talk about these schemes which are outside the cities, large plots, maybe 1,000 square yards, 500 square yards, still have this charm. It may act as a holiday home. If not a holiday home, just a piece of land where you can grow 5 trees that you love and sit there maybe twice a year, because most of the guys who buy plots don't visit it more than 3, 4, 5 times. But I think there is this whole liability reduction on the developer's mindset. And it's like Bombay, where you had a 500-700 square feet house, but everybody went and bought a 2,000 square feet apartment in Mira Bhayandar Road. It was cheap, and my secretary used to say, "Mera ek sir makan hai which is in Mira Bhayandar Road, because udhar jaake main weekend pe rehti hai." Because suddenly that space is required. People went and bought houses in Pune. So similarly, you will have a city where you want to live wherever you are, but you want to drive on a certain weekend or a holiday mood and say, "Nahi, mera bhi 500 square meter ka ek villa hai," and that obviously suburbs. So I think it's both ways. I think people want more space. Yes, work can happen from anywhere, and on the developer side, they have now got back into plots because suddenly they want to get rid of liabilities. I think that's what is happening in the market.
Rashmi, when you buy a plot of land as an individual, what kind of legal due diligence should you do? And second part of the question is, buying within the planned area and buying outside the planned area, what's the difference?
Now, I'll answer the first part of your question. Yeah. Now, so far as the legal due diligence is concerned, as I already discussed, now there will be two aspects that we'll have to look at. One is the due diligence of the plot of land that you have identified, and also the due diligence of the larger extent of land which forms that gated community. Now, this assumes significance for various reasons, mainly the approvals and your ability to own and live and construct a house there. Now, you will have to make sure, if it, as I already discussed, if it is a plotted development formed and sold by a development authority, yes, the authority will take care of all the issues. You will have to make sure that the acquisition process is in compliance with law and all the statutory requirements have been met. But if you're looking at a plotted development from a private developer, you will have to firstly see the title to the property. Now, in our experience, what we have seen is that as plotted developments move further away from the city, these are invariably agricultural lands which get converted for non-agricultural use and are formed as, layouts. So you will have to make sure that the due diligence is done properly, that all the people who had a right to that property have sold it, or if it is a joint development agreement, all of them have joined, in the execution of these agreements. Because we see that in agricultural lands, there are multiple complexities. Like somebody says, my grandfather sold this property and, he had 5 children, only 4 of them were made parties, the fifth one did not. And that fifth child has another, 8 people in his family. And these kind of issues do come up. So you will have to make sure that, the title diligence is done properly, that all the previous owners have signed the relevant documents, and that the developer has got all the approvals in place. Firstly, there will be a conversion order. So this is the first step for using agricultural land for non-agricultural purpose.
Yeah.
And secondly, you will have to see there is a zoning done for each area. The planning authority for, will have zoning classification for the land which comes within its jurisdiction. So you will have to check with the planning authorities bylaws and make sure that this comes within the residential zone, if it is a residential plot that you are looking at. Now, if it is some other zone, like it could be a sensitive zone, ecologically sensitive zone, or a green zone, etc., you need to understand that there will be certain restrictions on what you can use, how much you can build. So you will have to be mindful of what purpose you intend to put that land for, and whether it is permitted under the present zoning regulations. And if there is, after conversion, there could be another process called as change of land use. Now, if the land is classified under a particular zone, so like say it could be, if it is say a land abutting a highway, it could be classified under a transport zone if there is a a transport hub there. Now you cannot by default use it for residential purpose. The developer will have to get approval for change of land use, which is a separate process from conversion. Okay, so that it's a two-step process. First will be the conversion from non-agricultural to agriculture, and second will be the change of land use for the required purpose for which you intend to purchase the property. And thirdly will be the approval of the development plan for the layout. So which will basically say how many plots are permitted to be formed in that layout, how much road area is to be left, what is the community or civic amenity area that needs to be left, and how much area has to be relinquished for the development authority, etc. Now this layout plan will be the master plan for the entire development. You need to make sure that it is approved by the competent authority, and that the particular plot which you intend to buy is available in that development plan. And the last process, and after the layout plan is approved, the infrastructure amenities will be provided, like common area lighting, electricity, drainage, all of this. The developer has to make sure that the approvals are in place, because once you buy a plot, you cannot go on a standalone basis and ask for the approvals unless there is an approval for the entire layout. And the last process is that the developer will have to get a release order from the competent development authority. Once all the infrastructure facilities are provided, you go back to the development authority, tell them that, as per the plan, I have provided all of these things, so allow me to sell the plots. So only when a release order is given can the developer actually execute a sale deed. So release order is normally given in phases. In say the authority may say first 30% of the plots will be given under one release order, and after that you comply with certain milestones, I allow another 40%, etc. So you will have to make sure that the release order is there, and the particular plot which you intend to buy is mentioned in that release order. And also make sure that the developer has the ability to convey the land. If it is absolutely owned by the developer, he can convey it. But if it is under a joint development agreement, you need to make sure that he has the authority from the landowners by way of a general power of attorney or some such document which allows him to execute the sale deed, convey the land, and put you in possession of that property.
So in a nutshell, could you tell me what are the documents that a potential buyer should check? And can that buyer check himself, or does he need a legal expert like you?
So we would recommend that a buyer should consult a lawyer, because this is an investment for a lifetime and you would not want to go wrong with it. Because as a normal process, if a buyer, a layman, approaches the developer will only say that this is the particular plot that you're looking at and these are the documents. They give it on a pen drive or a CD, or share a link. But like I said, you cannot restrict your due diligence to that particular piece of land, and you need to look at it from a larger perspective to make sure that your ability to use that land and to own it and construct is not hindered in any way. So this is where a lawyer's expertise will come in handy, and it is always recommended to go through a lawyer, because the layman may not be in a position to understand the complexities of the issue. And like I said, your due diligence process will be to check firstly the title to the land, secondly the approvals, the conversion, change of land use, etc., and all the other infrastructure related sanctions that the developer has obtained.
Sure.
And to make sure that the registration is done in the manner that is recognized under law to give valid title to the purchaser.
Right. We'll come back to that registration process that
Yeah.
we'll pick up in the next this thing. Sunil, is between a built-up property and land, what is the difference as far as an investor is concerned? I don't need it for immediate use, but I need it for future use, or maybe I'm just investing in it to grow my money. What is the difference as a consumer?
So I think classically, land is always appreciated more than a built-up asset, because built-up asset has a depreciation attached to it. So, it's not so much evident in India, but if you go to America, where land is relatively very cheap, I mean, you'll be surprised that, I find that if I'm in America, I could live in a 4-acre house probably at half the price of what I live in now. But the construction in America is very expensive. So it's, about $100 a square foot, which is about 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 rupees a foot. Now, today's rate may be 7,000 rupees a foot.
Yeah.
Those are built of wood and they have an insulating material. Now that depreciates. So imagine, somebody buying a house and the house is depreciating every year at 3-4%, whereas the land is maybe 10% of the value of the house.
Yeah.
Now, in a situation like that, obviously built-up properties are not that attractive financially. And then obviously, if you look at land over a period of time will appreciate more. That has been the trend. And the example of that is that, even when I bought my house and my wife was very opposed to getting into a plotted development, the only logic that worked was that by selling this plot of land at whatever stage we can always go back into an apartment, but you spend this money in an apartment, will you ever be able to buy a plot of land? So at least that was true. But now, over a period of some years that I've seen,
Sunil, you have
the price rise in plots has not been as high and it has been pretty static. Okay, 1 second, let me just check. Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so maybe the connection was, so over the years, what has started to happen is that plots, because they've really risen at a price which has now been pretty steady, I think last 2-3 years have not seen a lot of rise in the value of plots as compared to, so they're at much par with what is a built-up property. To answer your question from an investor standpoint, I think investors are interested in only one thing: making money. Yeah. So whether it is a plot that makes them money or it is, an apartment that makes them money, I think what is important is to understand the fundamental principles of what will drive value to a certain asset that you buy. Yeah. And in that aspect, I think investors are pretty agnostic getting into a plot versus a apartment, and those are mature investors. I mean, immature investor or not such a evolved investor will always say land kharid lo, uske baad dekhenge kya hoga. That's been classic. But investors of today would, look at other factors like, if there is a metro and, in the north where sort of NCR or even Hyderabad or wherever metro has come in, and wherever metro is likely to hit in the next 1 year, you've seen prices go up. And no matter how dull property market has been, this has always worked. And I can give an example. In the recent times, we purchased an office in Sector 62 of Noida, and this was in year 2018. Everybody knew that by the end of 2018 or early 2019, the metro line will hit Sector 62 Noida. But because there was oversupply in a project that we bought in our office, we bought the office at 6,200 rupees a foot. Whereas the day metro started, within 2 months of that, prices just went up to 8,600 rupees. And that is this is no rocket science. You will always have a situation wherever there are factors like infrastructure that will come in, you will have a price rise. And this is similar to, the same price rise as you would have had in plots there. So I think from an investor perspective, it is a lot of other factors. From a, layman or a person who's not as investor savvy, if one has to buy, then I would always recommend a plot versus an apartment, because apartment would have all the other charges, which will be maintenance charges, and there would be depreciation to whatever your asset is. Whereas a plot will not have as many. But the catch here is that, people often compare oranges to apples. So if I have a plot which is in a suburb of a suburb, and which is what I can probably buy a plot of my choice, of my size, etc., and I'm comparing it to a city center, that's not the right comparison, because a plot at a given location versus a flat at a given location, plot may be better. Right. So you go outside in a suburb and you say, then please do not compare a plot in, let's say, Yamuna Expressway versus Noida, because those two things are very different. And I think that is where people often make a mistake. Plot khareed lete hain, lekin if you buy a plot in a really area which is 10 years or 20 years away for development to come in, then you would find that appreciation in the shorter run of 5-7 years may be better off in a developed property which is in a city, and that too when you have infrastructure developments that will keep on improving in that area. So I think, as an investor, I'm pretty agnostic. But, as a father, if I were to sort of gift something to my daughter, then I would never try and give her a built-up area, because I would say that you're going to always have a plot, and you can better sell this at any point in time, and you will always have a built-up property. And that's what I think keeps driving this whole plot business in at least a country like India. Even in the US, where you have a lot of land and people prefer loft apartments, and they are single empty nester house and all of that. You ask anybody. I was talking to a friend of mine in Cincinnati, and then he went to a god boondocks town called Auburn, which has only one university. He bought his house because he was an Indian. He said, "Mujhe ghar mein rehna hai." Now he bought a house from a Japanese, and the Japanese, for that amount of money, actually went 20 miles or 10 miles ahead and bought a 20-acre farm. So and my friend asked him, I said, he said, well, you know what, I have lived my working life. I wanted to be close to university. I'm a professor. It was a nice drive of 10 minutes. Now I don't have to go to university every day. So why should I go and live in a quarter of an acre, sort of a house versus a 20-acre farmhouse? So I think land for various reasons will always have a charm. And the simple answer is that yes, from a long-term perspective, or from a perspective that I want to really have a solid, rock-solid asset under my belt, even Rashmi said this, I can do it the way I feel like, is when, plots will always score. So whenever there's an argument, that what will score built up versus plots, I think after a point in time, plots will always, lead the race.
What is the point in time? How long do you have to hold a plot investment for it to have given you good returns?
So there are no specific benchmarks. I think this is what makes property very interesting. And, I could give you many answers to this, but the short answer is that I think there is no timeline like this. I have known people who went into a small city, and I'll give you two examples, Roorkee and Rampur, because that's where my mamas and in-laws are. And I should tell them that, look, buy a plot of land somewhere in the city center, because you're getting at 7,000 rupees a square meter. And even when I go to other towns which are of a similar scale, developed areas would get you 25,000 rupees. And they used to make a joke out of me saying that, 3 times or 4 times of this money is not possible. And there have these cities are now talking of 40,000 rupees. And that's in a matter of 5-7 years. Again, there are similar areas within Delhi, like for example, where I live in Noida. I bought a plot at some 60,000 rupees a meter. Today, if you go and sell it in COVID time, oh my God, I think I'm somewhere in a zone.
Yes. Now you're again. I think it's become.
Yeah. So I think there is no cookie cutter answer how long. But if you are in a plot and you really want to, look at some returns, be in it for at least 10 years. If it's anywhere between 5 and 10 years, you will really get the reward of, having invested in a plot. If you're thinking of anything less than 5-6 years, I don't think so. Plot is something that you should look at.
And also ask you to elaborate on one other point you made. You talked about the metro and its impact on the property values. Could you list a few impactors of plot values? Probably infrastructure, probably policy. What really impacts plot values in the short term, medium term, and long term?
So I think, you've taken me back to my student days, and we did a small thesis on what is the factor of how land values appreciate. And I think there is only one thing that correlates very well with land value is, and you have to hear this line called infrastructure availability per person in a certain area. Infrastructure may be very good, but if there is a lot of people living in that area and the spend on infrastructure is divided into so many people, then your valuation will not be up. So I think that is one metric. You can go to Connaught Place and see how many people live there, very few. Infrastructure is great. Laba infrastructure is great. Fewer people live there because it's mostly a commercial district. You come to a suburb which has more residential population, fantastic infrastructure, still the value will be down. So having taken a cue from that, yes, infrastructure connectivity has the largest impact. So I would say number one, connectivity. Number two, social infrastructure, which is schools and hospitals. Number three, how close are you to shopping? And then there is also this whole concept of community living, and people want to live in a gated community that has facilities, which essentially means a club and a community center. If you buy a plot in a scheme that does not have these community facilities, chances are it will never go up, in a long period of time. And therefore, I think those would be some of the factors. So connectivity, social infrastructure, the fact that you have community life within the plots. I think if you have a gated community, is when you would really see a rise in the value of plots. Because if it is not a gated community and you have a feeling of living in a colony which is open to everybody to come in and go, at least that may be very good urban planning, because I'm an urban planner, and a lot of socialist urban planning always taught that you should have these resources which are shared, but that's not so easy in a country like ours, where a park in a colony can actually become a nuisance. And classically, you want a house which is facing the park, because all day in the park, if there are rowdy children playing, then that park actually becomes a nuisance. So I think you have to have a gated community for values and of plots to appreciate. The other metric is not at all related to anything else. It's just about the ticket size. So if you have a small plot, let's say, which is 60 square meters versus a 600 square meters, I think the answer is very clear, because you would always make more money in a 60 meter square plot than a 600 one, because there'll be that many number of buyers who would chase a 60 versus a 600. And the buyer who will chase 60 actually is a buyer who actually will go and live there and will make a community out of that. And we had I used to develop small plots, and there was one plot that I did my first development as a developer in a plot. It was a 60 square meter plot. I had bought it, and then the prices crashed in Greater Noida. I couldn't sell it for the price that I had bought it for. So I made a small house on it. And the moment I made a house on it, there was this gentleman who was from Delhi. He had a retirement money, and my plot got sold. And then the whole row in that whole area that I built this house actually got sold, because people didn't have the resources to actually construct a house that far away. but they still wanted a house, and they wanted a small house because that's what they could afford. So the other thing one must always look at as an investor is I'd rather buy 3 plots of 60 meters if my investment is purely as an investor than buying a 150 or a 200-meter plot, because chances of liquidity and fungibility are much higher in a smaller plot. So those are some things that I would look at pointers when I want to invest in a plot.
Actually, I'll call out some of the things that you said. Transport infrastructure, very important. Social infrastructure, schools and hospitals, very important. Smaller plots tend to appreciate better rather than larger plots. I'm sorry? I'm sorry, Sunil, you said something?
Yeah, I said clubhouse, gated community.
Clubhouse and gated community, safety of your investment and convenience of living will be the other thing. Rashmi, when you go to the peripheral, today we are seeing that peripheral areas are doing well, largely because there's a lot of infrastructure that's coming. Maybe many years late, but those infrastructure projects are now driving the peripheral markets. It could be an airport, it could be expressways and intercity connectivity. When this happens, you suddenly see a lot of plots coming up in the periphery, suburbs and periphery. Some of it is even outside the planned area. Is that is that something that one should consider? And if so, what should you do?
Yeah. Yes, the risk that we run is that as you go further away from the city and look at plotted developments, you could be going out of a formal planned area. So which could be, in the jurisdiction of a local panchayat, etc. But again, the planning process will be the same. So what the government has been doing is that as the jurisdiction increases, the government is also extending the authority and scope of the planning authorities' powers. But if that is not there, you will have to make sure that the panchayat has approved the plan. But again, there is an element of risk that you are still looking at. But now with the coming into force of RERA, so there is some comfort that a purchaser can get, because any development that a builder is doing, whether it is apartments, villas, plotted development, all of this comes within the ambit of RERA. Yeah. So to that extent, yes, the regulatory aspects are taken care of. You will have to make sure that the local authority under whose jurisdiction that land is situated has given the approval. Or if the laws of a particular state, again, these are state specific laws. So one has to be aware of what the law in that particular state or area is. Whether the local authority or the panchayat of that area has the power to approve a development of that size. If it is not, then you will have to make sure that whether, in that case, it could be the deputy commissioner or the district collector of that area who is authorized to approve it, or it could be an approval from the government. So you'll have to make sure that depending on the size of this project, whether the competent authority has approved it and whether that project is registered under RERA. Now, there is also another misconception that people have that, if it is registered under RERA, then everything is clear. That, you just look at a RERA number and then if it is registered, so, you get that comfort. So registration of a project under RERA does not give that any more validity than an unregistered project. It only makes sure that there is a certain compliance requirement that the developer will have to meet.
And in case
of timelines.
You have an authority to go to in case of a dispute, right?
Correct. So there is a statutory protection that the purchaser will get under RERA, but you will still have to do the due diligence process and make sure that all other requirements and processes are complied with by the builder.
So we have seen a lot of consumers write into us saying that I've got Gram Panchayat approval. If you buy plots with Gram Panchayat approval, is that valid? Is that because there is another set of people who tell us that Gram Panchayats don't have the power to approve plotted development. So help us understand this.
So again, like I said, this is something that we will have to look at the laws of each particular state and see what the authority of that particular panchayat is. So in common parlance, if I can just simplify this, the Gram Panchayat plots. So what used to happen is that if there is a particular piece of land, which is agricultural land, now, as the urbanization creeps in and people stop doing agriculture, etc. So without going through the formal process of conversion for non-agriculture purpose, so people would simply go to the Gram Panchayat and say that, give me a khata for this property, assess the property for tax. I will pay this tax as non-agricultural. Give me a khata and allow me to do something on that. So this was not really a formal process or a legal way of converting the use of that particular land for non-agricultural, be it residential, commercial, or whatever purpose. But since, over a period of time, this continued, and there were multiple disputes. Like in Karnataka, there has been an amendment to the law which clarifies that even if it comes within the purview of a planning authority, and it comes within the zoning regulations, and it is zoned for a particular use, but if it is an agricultural land which has come within the larger zoning regulations, as a first process you will have to go for conversion. Okay, so this clarity in law came about much later, but during the period that there was this gray area of the lack of clarity or regulatory infrastructure to deal with these things, yes, there have been a lot of issues where people have faced that without going through the process of conversion, you get a Gram Panchayat khata or a approval and then say that I'm allowed to do this. But that is strictly not how planning, permission is given for a layout.
Sunil, you've seen that a lot of digitization of land records has happened. How has that impacted the plots market?
So I think, Jayashree, this is a good move, and I think it has helped a lot of people when you go and actually buy plots. In the state of UP, there is something called a Bhulekh, which is and Google it. It's a site that has a digitized record of almost all land parcels there, and you can trace the history of who was the owner, if there is a litigation which is going on. And often, these litigations are of the nature whether the land is under acquisition or not.
Yeah.
Because whenever there is a highway and whenever there is this whole plotting that happens in a certain area, one must remember there's a lot of acquisition also that the government plans in those areas. And sometimes the land that you buy or a plot that you buy could be under acquisition. So digitization has kind of greatly improved at least my corroboration with records. And there was a plot that I had bought in one of the villages in Noida. I got it registered. And after 3 years, there was an arrest warrant against my wife, that you have bought a land which is a government land, and then you have constructed a house on it, which is actually illegal. And under the destruction of public property, she was booked as a non-bailable warrant in UP. Now, in UP, if you have a warrant, then local courts do not give you bail. And so only recourse is you have to go to the High Court to seek a bail, which is a very, very painful and tedious process. And, suddenly you have a police landing in your, door and saying that your wife is under arrest. And obviously the inquiry officer was, sort of manipulated, and we got this injunction from the High Court and so on and so forth. The only thing that worked in our favor was that at the time when we did our due diligence and we had a screenshot and a official document from the registrar that this land was under acquisition, under land ceiling, then it got released from land ceiling, and it was not under acquisition. But later on, when we bought this, that came under acquisition 2 years later. And that is when, somebody, with a malified intention actually, got a case against us. Now, the only savior was that there was a digitized record, that the government couldn't deny. Yeah. And for the High Court then ruled in our favor, saying that such, acts of malified intent actually are nothing but a waste of the court's time. I think, when you look at these land records, it is extremely important, as Rashmi was saying, that at least do the, due diligence properly. One thing that, if you even have to speculate in such areas where there is NA, non-NA, khata, non-khata, there is always an area of land which you can buy for agriculture purpose. So unless you really want to go and build on it and make a farm on it and so on and so forth, you should buy land at least to that measure. Now in Delhi, that is, 1008 square yards In certain states, it could be more. I think my connection is again gone unstable. Can you hear me, Jayashree?
No,
Yeah. You can hear me, Jayashree?
now I can hear.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Now you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. So what I was saying is that at least buy a minimum area of, whatever is prescribed and qualifies as agricultural land. At least you will not face this music of, buying a land which is converted, non-converted. At least you can say, Saab, I bought a land which is agricultural land and I'm doing agriculture only there. So some, areas like Jaipur.
Can everybody buy agricultural land?
Yes, if the state kind of allows. So there are states which have this ability that you can buy agricultural land. Some states restrict non-farmer buying, agriculture. So Maharashtra, you can't do it. In Uttarakhand, you can't do it. So there are states that allow you to do. So, one should be very careful when you try and do this plotted buying in a hotbed of wherever there is a huge amount of action. Airport aa raha hai, saab udhar aap kharid lo, idhar aa raha hai, idhar kharid lo. You don't know whether what's going to happen to your land tomorrow. So the other thing is when you buy land and especially a plot, there's always something called a compensation rate of the government. So when you go and enter this race and you want to actually pick up a plot, you should always look at the rate at which you're getting compensated. You will get a land always at a discount to that. Because there's a farmer who's selling you land, he's selling you because he also knows that tomorrow he can get X lakhs an acre for that particular piece of property. But you're paying him an amount which is less than that. It takes care of the fact that even if your land is acquired, you will get certain return over and above what you have paid for it. So I think, doing a thorough duty, buying a land at least in the measure of what is qualifies as agricultural land, and then trying to buy it at a price which is less than what is the compensation price. Some of the golden rules of, going and, acquiring land in that area. However, these lands are infested with a lot of litigation. And, it is extremely important to understand what these litigations are. It is not easy, to buy land, because the moment you will go buy the land, put up a boundary wall, you will see a litigation come up, within the family. So if it is, let's say, God forsaken, a property of a minor, you should never get into a property which is that of the minor. If it is minor, then, Rashmi can tell what steps you can take. But if a minor goes against his father saying that my father sold this property against my interest and that is his ancestral land, then chances are that court will rule against you, which is something that one should avoid. So I'm not a lawyer, but I've faced these instances where we bought land and then we face a whole lot of music, or there is suddenly an access to your land which somebody claims is a land of a, XYZ person. Be very, very, sort of circumspect whenever the land is that of a trust.
Again.
And God forsaken if it's a public charity. Sorry, Jayashree was saying something?
Yes, I was saying that you were having connectivity issues. Can you repeat that last bit?
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that one should not go buy land, especially that of a minor, and that too of a trust. If it is a trust land, private trust is still possible to sort of go and pacify and do things. But if it's a public trust, then there's a whole lot of process and best available. Because, in acquiring about, 1,000 acres of land in about 8 states in the country, I can tell you that, something or the other keeps coming up. Whether it is a, village land somebody has sold you, there is some kind of a malefied intent, somebody will do something or the other. So whenever you go and buy a plot, I think very, very deep amount of due diligence. Buy plots from authorities. And two things that I will here. In authority plots, you get full FAR, because whatever is the FAR, which is how much you can build on a plot, will always be there. If you buy a private plot, and that too in a township, what the developer can do is it can take away your FAR and can use it in, let's say, his group housing. Yeah. So you have this notion that tomorrow I have got one floor and I will build 2 more floors on top of it. Then, in private townships, often developers have already used that FAR that if you're buying a plot of a private developer, then make sure that you have the FAR which you think you are buying, not that you're buying a reduced FAR. He could also have restrictions on the facade. So you may say that your house has to look like this. You go to Farm Meadows in Bangalore, everything is painted white, and you cannot build a boundary wall because that's how that developer Adarsh has got his property. So there are restrictions and controls at times. There are FAR restrictions, and also in the plots of authority. Let me tell you, in Hyderabad, if you had that experience, or if you went to Yamuna Expressway and you actually are an applicant, and the government itself has not acquired the land, so you may end up buying, land of an authority where the authority itself has not bought the land. Because remember, all these authorities have also become big land mafias. They are making a mockery in the name of development. They're actually becoming more greedy developers. And therefore, if you happen to be going to an authority which is greedy and has not got the land in the possession, but has given you the possession, then, it will take a long time before you will see your plot. And there are agitations that happen, because if you see, typically, agitations have happened, authorities have reneged and then again gone back and said, okay, because, we had to compensate farmers more, then please pay us. And, if you don't pay us, then we'll not give you permission to build. And that's a blackmail that's happened in Noida. That's a blackmail that's happened in a lot of places. So even when you are buying plots with authorities, make sure that they have the land, A, with them. You can see it yourself. Two, there is no litigation pending on them. I recently, also bought a plot of land in Noida where the land was in litigation for the last 30 years, and it only got released, 6 months back, and the authorities went on with an auction.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Sunil can't hear you. Let me go to Rashmi. I'll come back to you. Sunil, I can't hear you. You've got connectivity issues. Let me go to Rashmi and then I'll come back to you. Rashmi, I'm going to come back to you. The same thing that I asked Sunil, what is the, the digitization of land records? How has it helped in different states?
The digitization of land records is certainly a positive step, I would say, because
let me just...
I couldn't hear you at all. So I've asked Rashmi a question. Yes, I've asked Rashmi a question. I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the digitization of land records has certainly been a positive step, because it has given access to the common man to see, the documents pertaining to lands. But the extent of digitization and the level of, reliance that can be placed on these documents, again, is a very subjective thing, which may depend from state to state. Now, we also need to be aware of the fact that in India, despite the digitization, there is no one government authority which will give you a title certification. Like, unlike in the Western countries, in US, you have a government authority which certifies title. And if you go through that process, you do not really need an independent title verification. Right, but we have not reached that stage yet in India. But yes, there are enough documents now which are available on public portals, where you can give the details of the property, like you type in the village and the survey number or the tehsil, etc., the khata number, and you get certain details of the property, so you can verify what is the extent of that property. And you may also find maps of that property, which will help you see what is the topography, if there is anything that you need to be worried about. Like in Karnataka, we have the village maps which are available on the official website now. So that will help you see if there is anything that you need to be worried about. Like, if there is a village road or a cart track, what we say, that passes through the property, then we'll have to see while buying the plot if the developer has taken enough approvals to move that cart track or the village road. If it is not, then it is a potential problem, because you will not be allowed to construct on that plot of land, or it will continue to divide your plot. You will have to leave that as an easement. So these are the things that you can actually verify, and you will also be able to check if the khata is standing in the name of the current owner, if the developer is the owner, whether the developer has got the khata for the land, and whether the property taxes are up to date. So these are all the information that you can easily verify. And to that extent, yes, the purchaser can do the due diligence by going through the digital records.
But a digital record does not say that it is verified. It just says that as is it has been digitized, right?
Yes, yes. It is whatever is available has been digitized, and you can check the document.
And if there is any doubt, you can go back to the authorities with your new documents and show that there is a discrepancy, right?
Yes, correct. But also we need to be mindful when we are doing this search for the digital records. Now, purchasers may be under the misconception that if you see some data available on government websites and it corresponds with what the developer is saying, then everything is hunky-dory. But you also need to be mindful of the fact that litigation documents relating to properties are not easily available in any government data.
Okay.
Okay, now we have not yet reached a stage where litigation is linked to the government website. Now, there is a process. Now, if somebody files a dispute, a case on a particular plot of land and gets an injunction order or a favorable order in his favor, then the person will have to physically go to the government authorities, register a claim and say that in this particular record, you mentioned that there is a litigation pending. Now, unless this process is done, and not everyone may do that, you will not realize that there is a litigation going on. Now, you may have a certain set of data which is available on government records, which are digitized based on as is, available documents. And parallelly, there could be a litigation which is going on with respect to that property in a particular court. Now, these two are not necessarily linked together.
Okay, and that's a big problem then.
That is a big problem. So this is something that a purchaser will have to exercise due diligence and find out.
Sure.
Or there could be an encumbrance or a mortgage or loan or some claim on that property. Now, even encumbrance you can check because most of the states have digitized, their encumbrance records where you can fill in the property details and you will see what transactions have been registered with respect to that property. But again, there you will only find details of any registered encumbrance. That is, if there is a loan or a mortgage which is registered at the sub-registrar's office, only that data will be available. Now, in India, you have a process of creating an encumbrance or a charge on the property without having to register it. You can simply go deposit a title deeds with a bank or a lender and create a charge. Now, that again will not show on the official data. So these are the loopholes that need to be plugged, and the buyer will have to exercise the due diligence and make sure that these aspects are taken care of and addressed.
So we are moving in that direction, but we are not quite there.
Yes, so we are work in progress to an extent, yes.
I'm now running out of time. So Sunil, 3 pieces of advice to plot buyers today.
I think one piece of advice is that, please consult your wife before buying a plot, because most of the ladies actually do not want to have a plotted development. Sorry, ma'am, is that be consultative. I don't think so. Plot buying will always be where you would want to live. So be very clear about whether it's a decision, whether you want to invest or you want to live. I often see this conflict, and that leads to a lot of disruption later on when you kind of want to make future decisions. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, buy it wherever there is a possibility of increased infrastructure. That I think is extremely important. And third, I would say is absolutely to what Rashmi says. When you get into a plot buying or that matter, any plot buying, any property buying, be very sure of what you are buying today. It is often the cheap plot in a ghost town outside the township, which actually is the bait. Try and resist that bait and buy something which is more sensible, maybe more expensive. But remember, even if you buy it expensive and buy a smaller plot, that is always more fungible. That is always more sellable.
Right. Rashmi, your closing advice to consumers? Rashmi, are you there? I think we've lost her, but thank you so much for joining us. And this is a conversation that is going to continue on Magic Bricks on MBTV through the month. So keep tuned in with us. We will be announcing who our experts are. And buying a plot is serious business. Do not take it lightly. We'll bring you all the ins and outs of what you should be doing. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you.